We fear being cancelled, but the truth is, cancellation is just another word for transformation. Your worth was never in the title you carried. It has always been in the essence that cannot be erased. Every ending you resist is actually the beginning you've been waiting for. We live much of our lives with the belief that what we have, who we are, and where we stand will somehow last forever. The truth, however, is that permanence is one of the greatest illusions that the human mind clings to. Every role we play, every title we carry, every season of recognition that we walk through is bound by time. There is a beginning and there is an ending. When you look closely at life, you realize that endings are not accidents and they are not failures. They are simply part of the natural rhythm of existence. Think about the shows we watch, the stories we tell, or even the meals we prepare. They each have a start, they unfold in their own time, and then eventually they conclude. Phil Rosenthal, through his journeys around the world with food and culture, demonstrates this rhythm beautifully. He enters a city, he tastes its flavors, he laughs with its people, and then he moves on. No matter how vibrant or delicious that moment is, it cannot be held forever. It must be lived fully, savored in its entirety, and then released. This is the same truth that applies to our own journey. Nothing we hold onto, no matter how bright or meaningful it may feel, was ever meant to be permanent. The fear of cancellation, whether it's losing a job, ending a relationship, or moving past a chapter of recognition, comes from the false belief that permanence was promised to us. But permanence was never the point. Growth was. Life does not operate on the basis of holding still. It operates on the basis of expansion and movement. When one cycle closes, another cycle opens. When a title disappears, a new identity emerges. When one door shuts, it does so with the intention of guiding us toward another. Consider the human brain and its remarkable capacity for change. Neuroplasticity teaches us that our brain is always rewiring itself, always breaking down old connections and building new ones. In a way, our biology itself mirrors the truth of impermanence. Every thought, every habit, every emotional pattern is subject to change. We may cling to certain ways of being, believing they define us, but the truth is they are as temporary as the show that airs one season and then bows out for the next. The beauty of this impermanence is that it allows us to grow into someone new again and again. When we recognize the illusion of permanence, we begin to shift our relationship with endings. Instead of fearing them, we see them as necessary transitions. Just as a tree sheds its leaves in the fall, not because it has failed, but because the season demands it, we too are called to shed what no longer serves us. What looks like being cancelled by the world may, in fact, be the soul's deeper invitation to transform. The external ending is never the real ending, it is only the setup for a new unfolding. Phil's journeys often remind us that the moment is all we truly have. He sits at a table with strangers, he laughs, he listens, he shares, and in that moment he is fully alive. But then the meal ends, the laughter fades, and he steps into another story. None of those meals were meant to last forever, but the essence of the experience remains with him. This is how we can learn to approach our own lives. The experiences we have, the recognition we achieve, the connections we hold, they may not remain forever, but the essence they leave in us carries forward. That essence becomes a part of our being, shaping the next chapter of who we are becoming. There is also a hidden freedom in understanding impermanence. If nothing truly lasts, then we are not as trapped as we sometimes believe ourselves to be. A failure is not permanent. A success is not permanent. A label, whether uplifting or condemning, cannot define us forever. Everything we experience is fluid, always in motion. The fear of being cancelled loses its grip when we recognize that cancellation is not an exception, it is the rule. We all get cancelled in one way or another. not just once, but repeatedly. Careers change, identities shift, people forget, and life moves forward. Instead of resisting this truth, what if we embraced it? What if we understood that impermanence is not the enemy, but the very process that allows us to evolve? When we resist the natural ending of things, we suffer. We cling, we fight, we demand that what is changing must remain. But when we align with impermanence, when we accept the illusion of permanence as what it really is, we find peace. We stop trying to hold on to what cannot be held. We stop fearing what cannot be controlled. Instead, we begin to participate in the rhythm of life, knowing that the ending of one thing is inseparable from the birth of another. Imagine looking at your own journey as a series of seasons. Each season has its colors, its lessons, its joys, and its sorrows. And just like nature, these seasons must change. No winter lasts forever, no spring stays eternally in bloom, and yet each season plays its vital role in the whole. To believe in permanence is to believe in a season that never changes, and that is not life. That is stagnation. Life is movement, and movement means beginnings and endings, arrivals and departures, creation and cancellation. When we step into the awareness of impermanence, we begin to live differently. We start to value the present more, knowing it will not last. We express gratitude for the people around us, aware that time will eventually shift those connections. We take risks, we explore, we reinvent, because we understand that everything is already temporary. What we fear as an ending is only the natural unfolding of something greater. By surrendering the illusion of permanence, we open ourselves to the deeper truth of existence, which is that nothing truly ends, it only changes form. From the moment we are born, society begins to hand us labels. Child, student, friend, son, daughter, professional, leader, entertainer, creator. These titles are given to us, and over time we begin to weave them into the fabric of who we think we are. But the truth is, none of these roles capture the fullness of our being. They are simply costumes we wear on the stage of life, costumes that change depending on the season we are in. When we confuse the costume for the true self, we set ourselves up for suffering, because the moment that title is stripped away, we begin to feel as though we no longer exist. Yet underneath every identity we adopt, there is a deeper presence that cannot be touched, a self that exists beyond every role and every recognition. Think of someone like Phil Rosenthal. To the world, he is the host of a beloved travel and food series, the cheerful man who shares meals across cultures and tells stories that bring people together. That title, that role, is real in the sense that it shapes how others perceive him. But if one day the show were to end, if that chapter were to close, does that mean Phil ceases to be who he is? Of course not. Because behind the title of host, creator, or comedian lies a human being whose essence remains intact regardless of the role he played. This is a truth that applies to all of us. We are not our jobs, we are not our achievements, we are not the recognition we receive. These things are temporary garments, and when they fall away, what remains is the consciousness that wears them. The struggle begins when we attach too tightly to the identity society gives us. We measure our worth by the title in front of our name, the success of our projects, or the validation of others. When that external validation disappears, it feels as though a part of us has been erased. But what has actually been erased? Only the surface role. The deeper self, the observer, the energy that experiences life, remains untouched. We often forget this because our culture teaches us to define ourselves externally. We are conditioned to introduce ourselves by what we do rather than who we are. The problem with this conditioning is that what we do will inevitably change. Careers end, relationships shift, recognition fades, and even our bodies transform over time. If we root our identity in something that is always changing, then our sense of self becomes unstable, fragile, and dependent. Neuroscience shows us that the brain adapts to the environment we place it in. Neural networks form around the identity we repeat. If every day we wake up and reinforce the thought, "I am only valuable if I am successful," our brain wires that belief into reality. But here's the deeper truth: the brain is plastic, which means it can rewire. If we step back and realize that those titles are not who we are but only experiences of who we are, then we can begin to create a new identity that goes beyond roles. We can choose to remember that behind the changing labels is the timeless self. The essence of who you are existed before you were ever called by a title, and will exist after every title is gone. Phil's journeys remind us of this as well. When he sits across from someone in another part of the world, he doesn't connect to them through their title. He connects through laughter, through food, through presence. A farmer in Thailand, a chef in Mexico, a grandmother in Italy. None of these people need their title to matter in that moment. They matter because they are human, because they are alive, because they are sharing themselves authentically. This is the core of who we are. Our true identity is not bound by the roles we play in the external world, but by the qualities of being we carry within us, our capacity for love, for joy, for curiosity, for compassion. When we believe too deeply in the fiction of titles, we become terrified of losing them. We fear being cancelled, forgotten, or replaced because we think it means we will disappear. But if we understand that the role is not the reality, that the mask is not the face, we stop clinging to what was never permanent in the first place. The identity beyond titles cannot be cancelled because it was never created by society to begin with. It exists before recognition, before achievement, before success. It is the quiet awareness that notices every thought, the stillness that exists even when everything external is stripped away. This deeper identity can be accessed in moments of stillness, in meditation, in presence. It can also be felt in the simplest human experiences: sharing a laugh, holding someone's hand, tasting food with gratitude. These experiences connect us back to the self that doesn't need validation, the self that simply is. Titles rise and fall like waves, but the ocean beneath remains constant. The freedom of realizing identity beyond titles is profound. It allows us to reinvent ourselves without fear, because we know that no matter what changes on the surface, our core remains whole. It allows us to experience endings with less resistance, because we no longer confuse the ending of a role with the ending of our worth. It allows us to live with more authenticity, because instead of chasing a label, we begin to express who we truly are. This is not to say that titles have no place in our lives. They can be meaningful, they can bring joy, they can open doors. But they are not the foundation of our being. They are simply expressions, temporary roles that allow us to experience ourselves in different ways. Just as an actor can play many characters on stage without forgetting who they really are, we too can play many roles in life without mistaking any one of them for our true identity. The danger lies in believing that the role is the entirety of who we are. When we step back and see the larger truth, we realize that the essence of us remains untouched, unshaken, and unending, regardless of the roles we play or the recognition we receive. At the heart of every human being is an extraordinary capacity for change. We are not fixed, predetermined, or permanently locked into one way of thinking, behaving, or existing. Science has revealed what ancient wisdom has always hinted at: the brain is plastic, capable of rewiring itself based on what we experience, what we practice, and what we choose to focus on. This is the essence of neuroplasticity, the ability of our brain to break old connections and create new ones, allowing us to adapt, to learn, and to reinvent ourselves again and again. When we recognize this truth, we understand that no ending is final and no cancellation is absolute. What appears to be the conclusion of one chapter is simply the invitation to write another. For much of history, people believed that the brain was fixed after a certain age, that our patterns of thought and behavior were hardwired. But research has shown that this is an illusion. Each thought we think, each emotion we feel, each action we repeat creates a pattern in the brain. And just as easily as those patterns are built, they can be broken down and replaced with new ones. What this means is that who we are today is not who we must remain tomorrow. We are not chained to our past, and we are not prisoners of old identities. We are living systems in motion, capable of becoming something entirely new when we choose to direct our attention and energy differently. Reinvention is the natural consequence of this neuroplastic capacity. Every time we step into a new situation, every time we decide to take a different path, every time we imagine ourselves beyond our current limitations, we engage the brain's ability to create new neural connections. It is like carving out a new trail in a forest. At first, the trail is rough and unformed, difficult to walk, but with repetition and persistence, the path becomes clearer, easier, and more natural. The same is true for reinventing ourselves. The old patterns may feel dominant at first, but the more we practice new ways of being, the stronger those patterns become until they eventually define who we are. Phil Rosenthal's journeys offer a beautiful metaphor for this process. Each time he travels to a new place, he steps outside the familiar and into the unknown. He tastes flavors he has never experienced. He listens to languages he may not understand. He learns traditions that feel foreign. In these moments, his brain is not only absorbing new information, it is actively rewiring itself to expand his sense of what is possible. Every culture he encounters, every meal he shares, reshapes the map of his brain, allowing him to see the world differently. This same principle applies to all of us. When we expose ourselves to new experiences, new knowledge, and new perspectives, we literally reinvent our inner world. What is most powerful about neuroplasticity is that it does not require extraordinary circumstances to take effect. Reinvention can begin in the smallest of choices, choosing to think a new thought, to let go of an old belief, to act differently in a familiar situation. All of these small shifts accumulate to reshape the brain's structure over time. We often wait for major life events to give us permission to change, but the truth is we can begin at any moment. Reinvention is not a single act. It is a process of repeatedly choosing to become more aligned with the person we are capable of being. This becomes especially important when we face endings or cancellations. When a title disappears, when recognition fades, or when a door closes, the brain may at first cling to the old patterns. It may resist, it may feel fear, it may tell us that we have lost everything. But if we understand the science of neuroplasticity, we realize that endings are not destruction, they are opportunities for recreation. The brain is wired to adapt. When one pattern dissolves, another can be built. The loss of an old identity makes space for the construction of a new one. Instead of asking, "What have I lost?" we can begin to ask, "What can I now become?" The process of reinvention also requires imagination. The brain does not distinguish clearly between what is vividly imagined and what is physically experienced. When we visualize ourselves in new roles, new identities, new possibilities, we begin to prime the brain for change. The act of imagining creates neural patterns that mirror those formed through real life experience. This is why athletes rehearse their performance in their minds, why creators envision their art before they make it, and why leaders picture the future before they step into it. By imagining ourselves differently, we begin to rewire the brain for reinvention, preparing ourselves to live into that new reality. Gratitude also plays a vital role in this process. When we experience gratitude, we shift the chemistry of the brain and body, releasing hormones that promote openness, creativity, and resilience. Gratitude trains the brain to focus not on what is lost, but on what is gained, not on what has ended, but on what is possible. This shift in focus strengthens new patterns of thought, allowing us to embrace reinvention with curiosity rather than fear. Gratitude, combined with imagination and repetition, becomes the foundation upon which reinvention is built. The beauty of understanding neuroplasticity is that it dissolves the illusion of being trapped. We are not stuck in who we were yesterday. We are not defined forever by our mistakes, our failures, or even our successes. The brain's ability to rewire itself means we can step into a new identity at any time. What may look like being cancelled by the outside world is actually an opening for reinvention within. It is not an ending to who we are. It is a doorway to who we might yet become. When we see ourselves through this lens, life becomes less about holding onto the roles we have and more about embracing the possibilities of transformation. Every challenge becomes an opportunity to create new neural pathways. Every loss becomes a chance to build new strength. Every ending becomes the beginning of reinvention. Through the lens of neuroplasticity, cancellation is not the end of the story, but the rewiring of the self for the next chapter of becoming. One of the most difficult truths for the human mind to accept is that everything we hold dear, everything we cling to, and everything we build eventually changes form. What begins must one day end. This law is written into the fabric of life itself, yet we often fight against it. We mourn endings, we resist closures, and we fear cancellations because they challenge the stories we tell ourselves about permanence and control. But within every ending lies an overlooked gift, a doorway into transformation. That gift is gratitude. Gratitude is not simply a polite thank you. It is a state of consciousness that reshapes how we experience endings. It allows us to see beyond the loss and into the deeper invitation that the ending carries. When something ends, a relationship, a career, a creative project, or even a season of visibility, it is natural to feel pain. The nervous system interprets change as a threat, and the mind begins to resist what feels like being erased. But gratitude changes the chemistry of that experience. Neuroscience shows us that when we practice gratitude, the brain releases neurotransmitters like dopamine and serotonin, which elevate mood and expand our perception. Instead of narrowing into fear and resistance, gratitude widens our vision. It allows us to recognize that even though something has ended, it gave us something invaluable along the way. Gratitude takes us out of survival mode and into creation. Phil Rosenthal's travels remind us of this truth in subtle ways. Every meal he shares has an ending. No matter how delicious, no matter how joyful, the plate eventually empties and the laughter quiets. But Phil does not despair at the empty table. Instead, he savors the memory, he celebrates the connection, and he carries the joy of that meal into the next city, the next table, the next encounter. Gratitude transforms the ending into a seed for future joy. The meal is gone, but the gratitude remains, and that gratitude gives him energy to keep exploring. This is a metaphor for how we can live our own lives. When one chapter closes, the gratitude for what it gave us is what allows us to step forward without fear. Endings without gratitude often turn into bitterness. We look back and see only the loss, the disappointment, or the absence. But endings with gratitude become moments of integration. Gratitude does not erase the sadness of closure, but it redefines it. Instead of asking, "Why did this end?" we begin to ask, "What did this give me while it lasted?" This subtle shift changes everything. It allows us to receive the lessons, the growth, the beauty, and the connections that were hidden within the experience. Gratitude turns the final page into part of the whole story, instead of a rejection of the story itself. On a biological level, gratitude reorganizes the way we interpret experience. The brain is constantly searching for patterns, constantly deciding whether something is a threat or an opportunity. When we default to fear, endings look like threats, but when we cultivate gratitude, the brain begins to perceive endings as opportunities. This does not mean the pain disappears, but it means that the pain is contextualized. It means that the mind no longer clings to the illusion of permanence, but instead learns to see the beauty in transience. Gratitude teaches the brain that endings are not erasures but transitions. Every person who has walked through a major ending, whether losing a role, a job, or a public platform, knows the sting of feeling invisible. It feels as though what gave life meaning has been stripped away. But when gratitude enters the equation, the meaning does not vanish. Instead, it deepens. The question shifts from, "Why did this happen to me?" to "How did this shape me?" The energy of gratitude lifts us beyond self-pity and into self-awareness. It shows us that even cancellations are not punishments, but processes of redirection. The ending is not against us, it is for us, moving us into a new alignment that we may not yet see. Phil's journeys also highlight another dimension of gratitude, the gratitude for the present moment. He does not rush through the experience. He sits at the table, he engages with people, he listens, and he laughs. He immerses himself fully because he knows the meal will not last forever. This presence is born out of gratitude, and it is the presence that makes the ending bearable. When we fully embrace a moment with gratitude, we do not mourn its ending as much, because we know we lived it completely. We did not waste it. Gratitude teaches us that the way to face endings gracefully is not to avoid them, but to live so fully in the moment that when it ends, we carry no regret. In this way, gratitude becomes a bridge. It bridges the gap between what was and what will be. It allows us to step across the chasm of uncertainty with a heart that is open rather than closed. Gratitude says, "Thank you for what has been," and in that acknowledgement, it prepares us to receive what is coming. This is not passive acceptance. It is an active state of creation. Gratitude generates energy, and that energy becomes the fuel for reinvention. When we are grateful for endings, we align ourselves with possibility instead of fear. The practice of gratitude in endings is not always easy. It requires us to shift from the survival instincts of the ego into the higher awareness of the self. The ego clings to titles, roles, and recognition, insisting they must last forever. But the deeper self knows they were never meant to. The deeper self recognizes that everything has a season, and that season always carries gifts. Gratitude brings those gifts into awareness, reminding us that we are never truly losing, only evolving. The more we practice gratitude, the more resilient we become in the face of change. Gratitude does not stop endings from happening, but it changes how we meet them. Instead of contracting into fear, we expand into trust. Instead of mourning what is gone, we celebrate what was given. And in that celebration, we discover a new kind of strength, a strength that comes not from clinging to permanence, but from embracing impermanence with an open heart. Gratitude in the ending transforms closure into creation, loss into learning, and cancellation into a deeper form of connection with life itself. At the deepest level of existence, beyond roles, beyond identities, beyond the temporary labels society gives us, there is a self that cannot be touched, altered, or erased. This self is not defined by what you do, how people see you, or the recognition you receive. It is the part of you that observes, the part that is aware, the part that exists before any thought arises and remains after every experience has passed. While the external world may cancel a show, take away a platform, or strip away a title, it cannot cancel the essence of who you truly are. That essence is eternal, unshakable, and untouched by the constant changes of life. From the moment we begin to identify with titles, achievements, or roles, we make the mistake of confusing the temporary with the eternal. We start to believe that our worth lies in how many people approve of us, how visible we are, or how much recognition we receive. But this belief creates a fragile identity because anything that comes from the outside can also be taken away by the outside. The eternal self, however, is not built on approval or validation. It does not rise or fall with success or failure. It simply is. When we align with that self, we step into a kind of freedom that cannot be threatened by cancellation. Phil Rosenthal's joy in sharing food across cultures reminds us of this truth. His show is beloved, his personality is cherished, but what radiates through each interaction is not just the role of a host or creator. It is his essence, his curiosity, his humor, his love for connection. These qualities are not dependent on a television screen. They are not created by production or fame. They are expressions of something deeper within him, something that exists whether cameras are rolling or not. That deeper energy is what people respond to, and that energy cannot be canceled because it is not owned by the external world. It belongs to the eternal self. Think about consciousness itself. Consciousness is the silent witness that notices your thoughts, your emotions, your experiences. Thoughts may come and go, identities may shift, emotions may rise and fall, but the awareness that notices them remains unchanged. This awareness is like the sky, vast, open, and constant, while everything else is like weather passing through. Clouds may darken the sky, storms may stir, or sunlight may break through, but the sky itself remains untouched. Similarly, the eternal self is not altered by the roles we play or the cancellations we endure. It is the backdrop against which all of life unfolds. Neuroscience and spiritual insight both point toward this truth in different ways. Neuroscience shows us that the brain is always changing, always adapting, always rewriting itself. Our identities, our habits, and even our personalities can shift over time, but there is something deeper than the shifting biology, something that does not change even as the brain rewires. Spiritual traditions describe this as the soul, the consciousness, the pure awareness. Science may not use the same words, but it recognizes the existence of the observer, the part of us that notices change without being changed itself. That observer is eternal. It is the self that cannot be canceled. When we confuse ourselves with the temporary roles, we suffer deeply when those roles end. We believe we have lost who we are. But when we anchor into the eternal self, we begin to realize that endings and cancellations are only surface-level changes. They touch the mask, not the essence. The actor may lose a role, but the actor's ability to create remains. The creator may lose a platform, but the creativity remains. The individual may lose recognition, but the energy of love, curiosity, and joy that flows from within remains untouched. The eternal self is not bound by circumstance, and it cannot be taken away by the external world. Phil's travels also remind us of another truth. The eternal self expresses itself through connection. When he sits with strangers at a table, when he laughs, when he listens, when he shares a meal, what shines through is not a title, but a presence. That presence is timeless. It is the same presence you feel when you look into the eyes of another human being, when you experience a moment of awe in nature, or when you fall silent in gratitude. These moments reveal to us that what is most real about us is not the role we play, but the energy we bring. And energy, unlike titles, does not end. It lingers, it ripples, it continues long after the visible moment has passed. Grasping this truth also changes how we experience fear. Much of our fear comes from the belief that when something ends, we are diminished. But when we align with the eternal self, we understand that endings only change the surface, never the core. The fear of being forgotten, replaced, or cancelled loses its power, because we know that what is eternal cannot be erased. Our worth is not measured by how long the world remembers us, but by the energy we carry into every moment. That energy does not disappear when a chapter closes. It continues to live within us and in those we have touched along the way. The eternal self is also the source of reinvention. Because it is not bound by a fixed identity, it can take on infinite forms. It can express itself as a teacher, an artist, a leader, a parent, a traveler. It can move from one role to another without losing itself, because the essence remains constant. This is why people can begin new chapters later in life, why they can transform after great loss, why they can create again after being told they are finished. The eternal self does not age, it does not expire, and it does not end. It is the source of endless creativity and renewal. When we live from the eternal self, cancellation is no longer a threat, but a reminder. It reminds us that everything external is temporary and that our true anchor lies within. It invites us to return to the self that is unshakable, the self that exists regardless of recognition. It allows us to live with courage, knowing that even if the world takes away a title, a platform, or a stage, it cannot take away our essence. The eternal self remains always whole, always present, always untouched by the fleeting judgments of the outside world. Life, at its core, is a constant dance between beginnings and endings, arrivals and departures, creation and cancellation. We often cling to permanence, attaching our worth to titles, roles, and recognition, believing they will define us forever. But as we have explored, permanence is an illusion. Shows end, chapters close, identities shift, and what once felt unshakable eventually dissolves. Yet in this impermanence lies the beauty of growth, for endings are not failures but transitions into the next unfolding of who we are meant to become. When we remember that our identity is greater than any title, we loosen the grip of fear. We begin to understand that we are not the labels society assigns us, but the presence that wears them for a time. And when those labels fall away, our essence remains untouched. Neuroscience reveals that our very biology is wired for reinvention, that we can create new neural pathways, new behaviors, and new identities whenever life invites us to step forward. Through this capacity, no ending is final, because within us exists the ability to recreate ourselves again and again. Gratitude becomes the bridge that carries us across the gap of endings. Instead of mourning what has been lost, gratitude teaches us to celebrate what has been given. It allows us to transform closure into wisdom, cancellation into opportunity, and endings into seeds of renewal. Gratitude is the lens through which impermanence reveals its hidden gifts. And beyond it all, deeper than every shift, there is the eternal self. The self that cannot be cancelled, erased, or diminished. This self exists before titles and after them, before recognition and beyond it. It is the awareness, the presence, the energy that continues to express itself in countless ways. To live from this truth is to step into freedom, to release fear, and to embrace each ending as part of life's rhythm. Because when we know who we are beyond roles and beyond recognition, we carry within us the certainty that no cancellation can ever touch the essence of our being.